Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to see everybody who joins us in Ukrainian Media Center Ukrinform. My name is Olha Atamanova. It's been 10 years of the war, and today is day 652 of the full-scale invasion of our homeland by Russian aggressor. And I would like to thank the representatives of all the mass media who tell the world the truth about our heroic resistance. So today we will be talking on a very important topic for all of us: deportation and forced displacement of our children by Russians. We will talk about the facts and evidences that were collected by the OSCE Moscow mechanism experts and laboratory for School of Public Health Humanitarian Research Lab of Yale HRL. Joining us in this studio are Darya Gerasimchuk, Commissioner of the President of Ukraine for Children's Rights and Rehabilitation. Also joining us is Kateryna Howarth, School of Public Health Humanitarian Research Lab representative. Also joining us is Dr. Elina Steiner, OSCE Moscow mechanism expert, and right about to join us is Kateryna Rashevska, legal expert at the Regional Center for Human Rights. So, Ms. Darya, let us start with discussing the situation for the time being. Let's talk about the mechanisms and instruments that Ukraine is seeking in coordination with our foreign partners to bring our children back home. Today it's an honor for me to have our partners sitting right by my side, those whom we work with since the very first day of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russian Federation. This year we've created the plan of actions that was approved by the President of Ukraine, that was called Bring Kids Back Ukraine. It consists of 7 blocks, and today we will talk about the first block of this plan: the search, verification, and return of the deported and forcibly displaced children. But we also have to mention about the third category of children who also should be covered by this plan, Bring Kids Back UA. Those kids that are detained by the occupiers in the occupied territories because they are unfortunately being affected by Russian indoctrination incessantly. And this is why it's my pleasure today to be by the side of my colleagues who work within the first block, who fulfill the research that helps us to analyze what's going on with the Ukrainian children, where the Russian Federation moves them. It helps us in search of those children and bringing them back home. It's safe to say now that Russians, of course, they have very clear genocide policy in relation of Ukrainian children. It was all clearly planned, even if it seems that their activities are chaotic. They are not chaotic at all, and it can be seen from the testimonies of those children that we were able to bring back. For the time being, these statistics that we have, the only statistics that the state has, you can see it in the state information platform, the Children of War. It's been updated daily, but the figures have not changed. We have information about a little bit more than 19,500 children. Those are the children that we have personal data about, but we should be talking about larger number of children abducted by Russian Federation. We also talk about 4,000 children that were orphans that were also abducted by the Russian government, Russian authorities, or they are in the temporarily occupied territories, and the Russians don't let us get us back to the territory under Ukrainian control. But there is also a figure, 390 children on the portal that we were able to bring back. And for example, yesterday we were hearing about the return, or the day before yesterday, we were hearing about the return of Ukrainian children, and they don't show up on the portal Children of War. It's for you to understand that first the children should get back to the territory of Ukraine. There should be investigation in their relation held to find out what was going on with those children, what happened to them. Or so this is in case you have any questions, why don't the figures on the portal don't change. And if we analyze the stories of the children, I was telling multiple times what are the scenarios that Russia uses, at least 6 of such scenarios. But today I would like to mention about what the children say about those textbooks that Russian authorities use to work with Ukrainian children. They have these textbooks for all kinds of situations. Because when we manage to bring children back from so-called recreation camps to where they are being abducted, the children clearly tell that the terms of certain activities, of certain phases of indoctrination were falling on more or less the same days. Like within first 3 weeks, they were comforted, they were surrounded with entertainment activities, they were promised to be brought back home shortly. After the 3 weeks, they started getting told that it's dangerous to get back to Ukraine, and probably even your parents don't need you that much over there. Then this work was intensified and reinforced. Then the children started getting brainwashed. They were called for individual interviews. They were taken to rides around the city. They were put apart. They were transported from one camp to another, so they don't stay in that environment where they have some contacts with other children from who were also abducted from Ukraine. So now we have clear understanding that Russians act according to different textbooks that contemplate different scenarios. So it's yet another evidence of the fact that Russians are not going to return our children. This is why we talk about the creation of the joint mechanism, not only for the Ukrainian children, but so it operates throughout the world to make sure the situation like this does not repeat itself once again. And unfortunately, I can repeat it once again, that I'm reiterating again and again. We have a lot of international documents, clear and understandable, but they only effective when everybody acts according to the instructions. in case anybody refuses to fulfill their obligations, like Russian Federation in our case, we have to find a mechanism of pressure on such a players so they act according to the rules. Also, we have to say that when we bring Ukrainian kids back, the mechanism of return is not the subject of our discussion today, but when we talk about what's going on with the Ukrainian kids in those kids in the Russian families, if we talk about best interest of children, what is the best interest of children when they were spending year or 2 years in Russian families, how does it influence them? How can we say about the work with the children after they are being brought back home? It's a huge part of the work that is about to start now, because we understand that the return of children in coordination with the civil organizations, the representatives of which are present today in this studio, it's extremely important to have their support, to have their reliable helping hand, because thanks to them we were able to bring almost 400 children back to Ukraine, but we have to continue talking about reintegration of those children, because in case of bringing back large quantities of children, it should be organized in a better way, and we work quite actively so it doesn't come as a surprise to us. We want to bring our children back home, whatever it takes. They have to be back home, back to Ukrainian families, back to Ukraine, and we have to get rid of everything that Russian indoctrination put in their heads, because the children are coming back with the sentiment, with the thoughts that Ukraine doesn't need them, that in Ukraine there are Nazis or something else, something that is being indoctrinated by Russian propaganda. This is why we don't have a lot of time. We don't have many years to bring our children back home. We have to do it immediately. So once again, I want to thank our partners for being here today. Every such research helps us document the crimes of Russian Federation, to bring the Ukrainian kids back home and to bring Russia to responsibility. Thank you very much. Miss Caitlin, let me ask you, so what have you been able to research in investigation of these crimes that we document along with our international partners? Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here and to be back in Ukraine with all of you. The work that everyone is doing here is so important, and it's one of the things that we attempt to do from the United States and with all of the partners that we work with around the world, is to document everything that we can while using remote tools. So that means that we are picking up all of the little pieces that are left by Russia and by Russia's allies in this work. So that means that everything that Belarus and Belarus's partners are doing, everything that Russia and everything that those in the occupied territories are doing, all of those leave a trace. It's important to understand that everything that they do with regards to these children, they have to be seen as legitimate in the eyes of their own people, which means that they have to engage in these activities publicly. Every time they try to hide, that sends up a flare. It sends up a signal, especially when you're working with children, that shows that something is not right if you're trying to do something with a child and you're trying to do it secretly. And this is helpful, because it means that if you're trying to transport the child, if you're trying to justify a change in the child's life, if you're trying to create documentation, etc., all of those things, they have to be documented. Somewhere there has to be a trail, and that's very useful to us as investigators. And it's important because it means that for those, whether it's in Russia or in Belarus and elsewhere, it's actually clearer when things are going wrong. As soon as somebody tries to make something look like it actually should be a secret, because then people start to understand that this is not right, that something is going wrong, that somebody is trying to hide something that could be criminal, and that something is engaged with the most innocent among us, the child. somebody who has done nothing wrong, has done nothing to deserve what is happening to them. So there are a lot of different traces that we're able to pick up on. Now, I'm not going to comment on anything that could impact an ongoing investigation, but what you see in our reports, including the most recent one we documented from Belarus, is that there are more than 2,442 children that we've already documented. These are ongoing cases of children that are being taken from the occupied territories in Ukraine and being brought through Russia to Belarus. And these are just a handful of the cases that we believe to be out there. These are only the ones that we were able to confirm to a high level of confidence. There are more. We know that there are more. And certainly the governments of Belarus and Russia know that there are more. But when we present you a report, we want to make sure that we have everything ironclad, because we want to also offer the evidence we've gathered to the courts, because all of this is part of a multi-pronged approach. This is for accountability, it's for prosecution, and it's also in order to try and find the individual identities of these children to help bring them back, bring them home, get them back to Ukraine, and then to support them for the rest of their lives. That's the whole of the approach. So every single trace, every piece that we can find, we want to capture it, protect it as much as possible, and make sure that we are keeping each piece safe.
Дякую вам. Доктор Еліна, питання буде до вас. Що фіксує ваша організація зараз і чи розглядається можливість долучитися до цього механізму, про який говорила пані Дар'я? Не чуєте?
Can you switch to another channel? Yeah, I apologize. Sorry. Yeah, I would like to ask you, what does your organization is observing now? Do you consider an opportunity to join the mechanism being developed by a country to bring our children back? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So first of all, it's a pleasure to return to Kiev. I was last here in April in the remit of the OSCE Moscow mechanism, and this is also the reason why I'm here today. So as you know, there is an Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and under the auspices of this organization there are 53 member states, and one of the human dimension mechanisms, Moscow mechanism. It was not established for the purposes of the current situation. It was established all the way back at the beginning of 1990s under the Moscow Declaration, so the name is nothing but coincidental, although personally I consider that to be an irony here. So the aim of this Moscow mechanism, which was triggered by Ukraine on the 30th of March this year, was to establish a mission of independent experts to examine the phenomena of forcible transfer and deportation of Ukrainian children from the occupied territories into Russia, from Ukraine into occupied territories or in territories of Russia. And in accordance with that mandate from this international organization, so this is very different in comparison to other mechanisms, other research efforts that are out there, this mandated by 45 states of the OSCE. So I'm one of the experts, together with two colleagues, Professor Bilkova from Czech Republic and Dr. Helstveit from Norway. We were here in Ukraine, meeting equally also Madame Gerasimchuk, as well as other stakeholders, and examining the issue of this forcible transfer. The mission has now concluded. We concluded the work on the 26th of April, presenting the report to the Permanent Council of the Organization for Security and Cooperation on the 4th of May. This report is public, it's very extensive, over 90-page report, looking into the violations of international humanitarian law, international human rights law, potential breaches of international criminal law, and presenting possible avenues of accountability, as well as presenting recommendations primarily to Russia, but also to Ukraine, international community and organizations. So in respect to your question, I suppose the work for that mechanism has now concluded. However, of course, one doesn't engage with mechanisms of this caliber as an independent human rights lawyer. You don't do it just for the sake of doing it. There is also very important work that needs to be done subsequently in order for this report to be properly understood, in order for the recommendations to be properly understood, which is why I'm deeply honored that my presence has been welcomed here today in Kiev as well, in order to explain more about the findings of the report and especially about the recommendations. Thank you.
Дякую вам, пані Катерино. Ваша організація.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kateryna. Your organization, just like the organizations representatives of which are present here in the studio today, works systemically on these violations, the deportation and abduction of Ukrainian children. So in your opinion, what is the situation for the time being, and what are the mechanisms that can be effective to deal with this problem? Thank you very much. I would like to start with something that may be not so obvious for everybody. Russia doesn't need Ukrainian children. Russia needs the new Russian patriots. And if a Ukrainian child doesn't want to get their identity eradicated, if they don't become a new Russian citizen, they have just a limited number of options. First, to get a draft notice, a conscription notice, as Bogdan Yermokin. I hope that, I'm afraid that in future we will be documenting way more cases when Ukrainian children are used by Russian army or Russian special services. Well, in some cases of deportation, and we're talking about hundreds of cases of deportation here, they were organized by the investigations committee of Russian Federation, and they had some criteria for selection of Ukrainian children who were subsequently deported to different educational institutions of that investigative authority. Also, there is another option like confinement cells or prisons. If you are a very proactive Ukrainian boy, you don't want to listen to Russian anthem for 4 hours, you can be put to prison. Then there is an option of so-called medical evacuation. When you get an injury that can be cured, but you are not provided a proper medical aid, and unfortunately you bleed to death, or you can be brought to Belarus, and then nothing can be known to you, even to your closest relatives, for a year or more. Well, there is a number of other options, but Russian Federation is aspiring at solving their own demographic and geopolitical problems using Ukrainian children. But the Ukrainian children are of not so much concern to the global community as well. When the conflict between Israel and Palestinian autonomy and Hamas unfolded, we ended up in terrible situation of comparison of children suffering, like whose children suffer more, like those abducted by Hamas are not the same as the children abducted by Russians who were handed over to Russian families. But this is such incredibly insane situation. Like, as a lawyer, I can document the violation on Convention on Children's Rights, violation of international humanitarian law, but still we end up in this situation of competition of children's sufferings. Talking about international mechanisms, whether they work or not, our organization, in partnership with other organizations, representatives of which are present at the studio today, we've submitted the reports to International Criminal court, 3 of them. First was about forcible handover to Russian families. Like, look, there are cases of adoption of Crimean orphans even before the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Now we can assert that there are similar cases after the beginning of the full-scale invasion. And this case of Sergei Mironov, top-level Russian government official who adopted Ukrainian child Margarita, Ukrainian girl, having changed her personal data, her name, her last name. So if it is not a crime of genocide, then what does a crime of genocide look in compliance with the Convention of UN Organization? How different can be handover of a Ukrainian child from one protected category to another environment? So all of the signatories of this convention are supported to prevent and to punish genocide. So where is the line of those countries punishing genocide when the young girl Margarita was adopted by Sergei Mironov? Did we bring her back? Did we produce a red notice by Interpol for Sergei Mironov as a person involved in crime of genocide? Were there any mechanisms triggered in compliance with the Rome Statute and UN Convention? Well, the answer is no. And the same problem is with Virginia Gamba, the special representative of the United Nations Secretary General. It's a wonderful institution, but where is the action plan for Russian Federation? How long is it gonna take to coordinate it, arrange it, sign it? How is Russian Federation more exclusive than Hamas? Because Virginia Gamba had this plan for Hamas. How is Russia better than Israel or Hamas or Palestinian autonomy? Let me emphasize that Ukraine has signed a plan of a kind. However, we're not obliged to. We're not on the condemnation list, but at the same time we try to protect our kids. We have some monitoring preventive mechanisms, but unfortunately they just don't work quite well. I once again admire the report of Moscow mechanisms that covered forced deportation. Their recommendations contain things that would help us to bring our children back today already, not within the next 90 years as it may happen in view of the existing dynamics. But again, why those recommendations are not yet implemented? Russian Federation remains a part of OSCE. Moscow mechanism was created in the territory of Russian Federation. And the problem is that we have existing mechanisms in place. We have the arrest warrants. But why don't those warrants never mention the crime of prevention of repatriation of Ukrainian children? We were trying to contact Partners for Ukraine to expand the list of crimes under those warrants, but it seems like we just sent a communication to the universe without response. And this is why I can conclude that international community doesn't make enough. In the same way, Russian Federation doesn't need the Ukrainian children, and we are the only ones who need Ukrainian children, and we have to fulfill our leading role in documenting, in compensation, rehabilitation, reintegration of the returned kids. We have to take charge of all the investigations, and I'm sure we're gonna make it. But we need time for this, and time plays against us. Thank you, Ms. Kateryna. Sounds a little bit pessimistic. It seems like we don't understand where we should move to, how to make sure our children are brought back and don't suffer. Ms. Darya, maybe the situation looks different to you. Well, it doesn't sound like a dead end. It sounds like a call for action. It sounds like a clear understanding by Ukraine of what's going on to our children. and what we and what the global community should do and keeps doing for bringing Ukrainian children back. So I would rather switch your opinion to proactive actions rather than to pessimistic outlook in the dead end. So I can state with confidence that there are countries that are ready to support Ukraine in our fight for Ukrainian children. We still hope that this union of countries this alliance will be productive, and we will be able to get help, and we will be able to fight jointly to develop the system of protection of children all around the world. But still, there are countries, there are actors who try to call black white, who try to say that, again, I'm getting back to the adopted children, who keep saying that probably it's better for those kids to remain with those criminals who abducted them, that probably it's not, they shouldn't be so proactive, that probably we don't have mandate to monitor and to get some data. Well, by us, I don't mean Ukraine, but some known international organizations. So once again, I would like to encourage every civil organization, every organization in Ukraine or in other countries, all the European Union agencies, all the United Nations agencies. I urge everybody to continue supporting Ukraine, because it's important. The information that we get, the data that we get, the reports that we make, they should be disseminated. They should grow into implemented plans, implemented recommendations. And we should continue asking Russia, so what about your reaction? What's your response? What have you done in response? Where are the returned children? Where are the admitted monitoring missions? So once again, I would like to thank all the civil society of Ukraine, all the international community for active support in documenting, which is incredibly important, because we are being frequently asked, what is your goal? To bring Russia to liability, or to bring Ukrainian children back? So if we are to choose, of course we choose bringing children back, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the perpetrator, the criminal who brought the children back or who got those children taken away from them, that they shouldn't be punished. So this is why those two tracks should come in parallel. And documenting is one of the steps, one of the ways to press on Russian Federation, because if there are undeniable evidences, and the amount of evidences is growing, and Russia understands that the liability is coming, and it's coming in compliance with all the documented crimes. Yes, it is terrible. This morning I've waken up and I've read information about a girl that Kateryna mentioned, and as a human being, I just cannot formulate it. I cannot articulate my feelings when there is a family, there is a father and a mother, there are two kids, and then somebody is coming to your home, shooting at you, taking you, bringing you somewhere. Someone who doesn't provide you with medical aid, you bleed to death, but you stay alive and you still remember it. I don't wish any country of the world to experience what's Ukrainian experiencing now, but what I want Russia to understand, that they will be brought to liability, everybody will be brought liable. I'm not only talking about Putin and his closest circle. I'm not talking about those people who were personally taking the Ukrainian kids and transporting them to Russia. But I'm talking about all those who trust Russian propaganda, but subconsciously they know that they do illegal thing. All those who adopt Ukrainian children, all those who foster them. We're not talking about some periodic fostering, because it's already infinite. Everybody who prevents Ukrainian children from being brought back home, everybody will be brought to liability. Ms. Darya, you've mentioned the third countries as one of the tools that we can use to bring our children back, and we've seen some working cases. Recently there was information about bringing the children back through Qatar. So how efficient is this tool, and if we can say so, what countries are ready to get involved? Well, no, unfortunately we cannot talk about this. Some topics require silence. If we talk about the security and safety of our children, there are certain restrictions, certain limits that we cannot cross. So let's not talk about return of our children today. Thank you. Thank you, dear friends. If you have any questions or comments, you're kindly invited to join our conversation. Good afternoon, Natalia Molchanova, Ukrinform. I would like to ask Ms. Caitlin Howarth, in your opinion, should we bring up the issue of abduction of Ukrainian children in international arena in the background of Hamas information campaign? What will be your comment in this regard? Thank you.
It's a good question. I think that it can be challenging for a number of different international actors, especially right now, to bring this up. A lot of them will struggle with this question, and probably you will not necessarily get very far. I think for a number of them, this is a question of strategy and trying to say that they will probably see these as two, not necessarily not related, but in terms of like broader geopolitical strategy, but they will see these as still two distinct issues that should be that have different ways of being addressed. From what I know from my time in Washington, that's the way that I think many people would see that.
Thank you very much. Then I would like to ask anybody who can comment it. United Nations say that they don't have a solution to bring abducted Ukrainian children back. They say that it's only between Ukraine and Russia. Are there international mechanisms? Is there an opportunity? Do international organizations have an opportunity to access the Ukrainian children who were displaced, who were transported to Belarus, to Russia? Unfortunately, we know that international organizations don't have access to Ukrainian prisoners of war, but in case of Ukrainian children abducted to Belarus, do the international organizations have access to them? Can they find out what are the conditions that those children end up in? Well, let me start, and maybe some of my colleagues can continue. Well, first of all, I disagree with the statement that United Nations don't have a mechanism to bring Ukrainian children back. Well, they don't have a specific mechanism for Ukrainian children, but again, implementation, Ukraine is not the only country on the earth when children were abducted. Well, we have as an instance of Ethiopia and Eritrea. It was organized through the Office of the High Commissioner for Refugees. Then there was a case of returning of Syrian persons who ended up as victims of abduction. So they are not children, but the mechanism is still there. So we can try to develop something else to complement this mechanism. There are existing mechanisms of monitoring, and Virginia Gamba was successfully visiting Russian Federation. She visited Moscow, she visited Maria Lvova Belova, and now there is such an information that she plans a visit to Belarus to look at the Ukrainian children who stay at the Belarusian re-education camps. So basically she can take a look at Ukrainian deported children, but she doesn't want to because she thinks they don't fall under her mandate because they are not abducted. So the question is how successfully we can engage the existing mechanisms and how we can adapt the approach to adapt those mechanisms in the situation when we are forced to stay in touch with the country who is a constant member of the United Nations Security Council. Well, you've mentioned the prisoners of war. Maybe you were deep in the ICRC or IFRC, but I want to emphasize once again that Belarusian Red Cross cannot help us with anything because they are not part of IFRC anymore. Their membership was suspended. As to the Russian Committee of Red Cross, I apologize, but the organization, the website of which has a page of a representative office in occupied Crimea, a representative of which became a part of the National Committee board. So I don't know to what extent this organization can be efficient. Maybe in case of last resort, when we have a catastrophic need to verify something, this is the only case we can rely on them. Ms. Darya started talking about them, that we don't want to sit around here and suffer and complain that nothing works and nothing can be done. We are here with the call for action. Please use all of the existing capabilities and existing mechanisms that can be adopted for Ukraine. Thank you. We have more questions from the floor, it seems like. Well, I think that now that we don't have any questions from the floor, all the questions got answered. So I would like to thank all of you for today's conversation. We want to express incredible appreciation of your participation as foreign colleagues for being here with us.
I just wanted to give one little closing thought. With each piece of evidence that we gather, there is more and more to show just how much pre-planning went into all of this before the full-scale invasion began, in the months ahead, and throughout. So I have a specific message also, and this is from a conversation I had at the new Center for Children's Rights. I've been hearing more about how some of the parents of children who have been taken believe that they are to blame for their children having been taken. So I just wanted to share a little message with them specifically. It's not your fault. Your children were targeted. You, as families, were targeted. You were picked out specifically for who your children are, for how vulnerable you are, and your children were taken from you. This was a plan. You were part of a plan. None of that is your fault. You did what you thought was best for your child. Everything you do is to protect your child. We understand that.
Pani Elina.
Miss Elina?
Very much. It's not exactly a response to the question that was asked, but nevertheless, there are 3 points I wanted to highlight, if I may please take just a couple of minutes of your time. First of all, when it comes down to international mechanisms and various organizations, the frustration is more than understandable, absolutely. However, when it comes down to international law and the enforcement mechanisms, it is absolutely paramount to remember that none of these mechanisms exist in silos. Although they sometimes seem to be operating in silos, they don't. And what is very important is also to understand how to make the interaction between them happen. I think what is important in the specific context of the topic we're discussing today is to recall two, in my personal lawyer professional opinion, significant, relatively recent changes. So first of all, when it comes down to the renewal of the United Nations Commission of Inquiry mandate on Ukraine, the issue of Ukrainian children was specifically included in that. Equally, the issue of deportation, forceful transfer of Ukrainian children was specifically included when the mandate of the newly appointed Special Rapporteur on human rights situation in Russia was renewed just a couple of months ago. And I think these avenues highlight that there is most certainly also concern within the Human Rights Council over the topic. I do fully understand the frustration, it goes without saying, but nevertheless there are steps that are being taken, and I think it is important that we also allow these processes to go ahead. Having said that, I would also like to go back to the recommendations that Moscow mechanism, of which I had the privilege to serve on, all the way back in at the end of April. As I said before, we made 3 sets of recommendations to Russia, to Ukraine, and to other stakeholders, states and international organizations. But above all, there was one recommendation which was addressed to one and all, to everyone above everything else, and that is to prioritize, absolutely prioritize, the reunification of these children with their true families, their true legal guardians, their true parents, grandparents, and ensure that this family reunification is prioritized above all other considerations. And to this extent, I would like to very much, once again, highlight and support what Madame Gerasimchuk said just a few minutes ago. The best interest of the child must be the prevailing element, the prevailing concern in our quest for these children. Their best interest is to be with their families, to be with their true families, to have their true identities protected, fostered, and cared for, just like any other child. And may I please remind us all that, of course, the issue of accountability is paramount, and under no circumstances do I wish to suggest it is not. But the priority must be these children. Thank you.
Дякую. Я дякую вам і безумовно.
Thank you very much. And we want to thank all of our government agencies and non-government agencies, all the civil organizations, our international partners, everybody who works in this area, everybody who is concerned with the future of our children who were unfortunately deported and against which the crimes of aggressor country are being committed. Dear friends, thank you very much for the interest to this topic, and we also want to thank the armed forces of Ukraine, thanks to whom we can hold events like this. Thank you very much. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes.